I am so excited to have you here, Matt. This is going to be an incredible podcast. We have Matt Landman here. He is the creator, the director, the producer of Frankenskies. That it sounds like something we think of Frankenstein, and then you think of something that's not real, right? So why did you call it Frankenskies, and what kind of urged you towards creating this movie?
The reason I named it Frankenskies is to make it palatable. At the time, there was Frankenfood, right, for GMO food, and the skies were being altered in like a GMO Frankenstein creation kind of way. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein talks about creating this monster, and that's what's going on in our sky. Like a monster is being created overhead with this weather engineering and the climate control and the geoengineering dimming of the sun. So I got into it because I never knew this could be a possibility. But when I did learn working on an organic farm in Northern California, I witnessed weather warfare. I witnessed drought causation, the quelling of a big storm that was coming, and we were in the midst of a big drought. And what I witnessed was, first of all, it was an irregular pattern of appearance. All these planes showed up on the edge of a big storm, and they grid patterned on the front of the storm pattern as it came off the ocean. And later I learned you can seed clouds, or you can do the opposite. You can dissipate moisture and make it not rain. And what I witnessed was the planes showing up made the storm not drop any rain at all. We had black storm clouds overhead for a week, but nothing fell out. And we were really expecting 100% chance of rain for a week, and this would alleviate the drought. This is in Northern California, where usually you get this deluge of Pacific Northwest moisture as the jet stream comes off the ocean. You have a moisture pattern that lasts from around October to March. And this hadn't been happening. This is an unseasonal thing where usually you'd have it occur. And in this instance, we hadn't had our jet stream dump the Pacific Northwest moisture pattern for some years. So I witnessed it firsthand. And then when I started to do research and found out what I had seen, I hit the pavement and I started asking people if they knew about it, and nobody knew about it. And so eventually I realized that I had to make something that was palatable, that I could share with people and other people could share with their peers and coworkers and family members, and something that wouldn't be controversial, something that people could sink their teeth into and realize what's going on.
And you were actually seeing kind of the storm, and then you were seeing like a zigzag pattern of planes altering this storm in some fashion, right?
Yes, the storm was rolling in off the ocean. And my boss, who's a farmer, he had Doppler radar, and he had us out in the field harvesting pumpkins and squash so they wouldn't rot in the field. And he was expecting, and the Weather Channel was anticipating 100% chance of rain for 1 week. But then when the planes showed up and they zigzagged, and on any given day on the farm, I'd see maybe one plane pass over, very sparse air traffic in this rural Northern California agriculture community. And in this instance, we had about a dozen plus planes, and they were leaving these persistent linear cirrus cloud formations, these white lines out of the back of jets, whereas normal air traffic was not. And so that made me start to wonder what was going on. And that was my big awakening moment, and gave me the drive to continue on to expose what was going on to the world.
Because a lot of people, they just think that this is some kind of conspiracy theory. Who would do this? Why would they do this? Why would they play with our weather, our climate? And then also it's very disturbing to recognize that, what they are putting into the cloud and what they're using in the sky is something that rains down on us. It rains down on our vegetables, on our crops, into our water. And here we're trying to lead clean lives. We're trying to detoxify, get rid of heavy metals. And here it's just raining upon us. So is there really proof? Yes, I know that you saw these zigzag patterns, but is there proof that this is really real?
The proof comes from people taking science into their own hands. The mainstream community of science and media won't tell us what's actually happening. And this is a covert operation. There's a lot of players behind the scenes, including the Department of Energy, the Air Force, and even NASA with a budget of $80 million a day, and they have a whole chemtrail program. It's called CARE, the acronym CARE. It stands for the Charged Aerosol Release Experiment. So because of all the finances that they have and the control mechanisms, it's not going to be told to us in the mainstream. But people of normal walks of life have started waking up and trying to figure out what's going on. One great example is in Kingman, Arizona, northern Arizona. There was a group of 30 people who came together of all walks of life, but none of them would you ever think were conspiracy theorists, tinfoil hat kind of people. These are farmers, these are machinist workers and welders and forest workers and what have you, people of all different walks of life. And they came together because in northern Arizona, in the desert, you would have this cobalt blue skies. And whenever storm systems did come in monsoon patterns, it was obvious that they're big, fluffy clouds. And it's not like on the coast where you get maybe this fog that comes in and people don't really know what that is. In the desert, you have either clear skies or clouds and not this in-between, misty, hazy, whatnot. So when they started seeing these groups formed, right, activists come together and take science into their own hands when they're not getting answers from their legislators or the scientific community. And what they did was they started testing rainwater. On days where they saw these planes show up, leaving these lines in the sky, if it rained the next day, they would take quality air samples and send them to labs. What was showing up is significant amounts of aluminum, barium, and strontium. So they tested their soil. They tested also their hair and their blood and corroborated all this evidence with patents that had been released that talk about using aluminum, barium, and strontium to manipulate the weather. Then also, hidden in plain sight, if you look at the NASA website, their CARE program states that they use aluminum, barium, and strontium to spray in the sky with their drones and planes and even helicopters and ground-based stations to monitor the dispersals of the aerosols. They use those same constituents to make what they call noctilucent clouds to experiment with the atmosphere. They say that they use the atmosphere as a laboratory. That's a NASA quote. And so when you get all this information and put it together, it's a beyond correlation. Once you get to the point that it is causal, then you can move forward and try to do something about it. So they were raising the alarm and they got a senator on board. She was demonized by the media, and she was a senator of Arizona, and they ended up calling her Chemtrail Kelly, and to squash the truth and try to send the message out to other legislators that if you get on board with this, we'll ruin your career as well. But people have come together and basically proven that this is going. And if you do the research and look up and wake up, you'll see with your own eyes these irregular patterns of appearance, especially when it comes to storm systems, or if you don't live near an airport at all and you're in a really rural community where you don't get any air traffic overhead, but then all of a sudden when all these planes show up and there's this irregular pattern of appearance, this can be a big awakening moment for people, because what happens is not only is there an uptick in this a statistically significant uptick in air traffic, but they're also leaving lines out of the back of the jets, whereas normal air traffic per se and regular flight paths and regular flight patterns, they don't have these persistent linear cirrus cloud formations coming out of the back. So researchers have put it together, scientists and different people around the world who care have come together, authors and people of all different walks of life, professors and all this sort of whatnot, have come together and sounded the alarm. There's not anybody stepping forward to admit that they've been acting in treason and poisoning the population, because then they would face scrutiny, transparency, crimes against humanity. But it is basically proven and ongoing. And if you look at my movie Frankenskies, which dives into the history of it all, it starts to make sense, because they were perfecting and sharpening their tools come the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and come the 1960s, the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Vietnam during the Vietnamese conflict, it was flooded for years in this thing called Operation Popeye, which is almost common knowledge if you do the right research, but there had been an admission, and the UN came together afterwards and voted 58 countries to zero, that you can't use weather warfare because it'll impact neighboring countries. So the ability is there, and it has historically happened, but then that technology got swept under the rug to push this climate change, global warming scenario.
And I love your movie. It's amazing. It's incredible. And for everyone out there, you can really, You're like you're saying, if somebody does a little bit more research, they find in plain sight that they are admitting to what they're doing. So how can people how can they learn more? Obviously watching your movie, but what other resources, where can they look at other than obviously looking up in the sky and then seeing these planes going crisscross? And we see that here in Boise, Idaho, where I live, have a beautiful day. Then all of a sudden you see these planes going zoop, and it creates like this checkered pattern in the sky. So all of a sudden we can't see the sky anymore. So where would people, how can they learn more about these things?
On my website, frankenskies.com, and also actualactivists.com, I have links to presentations that I've given to dive deeper into it. And then in the presentations, I outline different documents that people can find for themselves. There's been consortiums on geoengineering, annual meetings where they plan their attack, really. How are they going to manipulate the public into believing that this is a good idea? And how can they get away with what they're doing? Even I found a document from 2001 from the Department of Energy called the Tropospheric Aerosol Program, where they outline how they're going to spray the skies in the troposphere to manipulate and engineer the weather and dim the sun and what have you. And it starts to make sense when you wrap your head around it, because the Department of Energy, which is dirty energy, coal burning power plants and oil and gasoline, they're being to blame. The finger is being pointed at them and us, of course, for the global warming hoax, right? But they're behind the scenes also with the problem reaction solution, creating the solution for us, which they already have intact and have been investing in for years. And in the Tropospheric Aerosol Program, TAP DOE PDF document, they even disclosed that they spend $4 million in just 2001 on risk assessment and detection aversion, not getting caught in what they're doing. And then their budget is extrapolated out for years. Basically, you can stack the deck as much as you want, but eventually the truth prevails. And if you just do the research and start digging, they're basically admitting that they're already doing it while trying to convince us that they need to start doing it in the future.
So the question for a normal Joe like myself, then you start to ask, who would do such a thing? What are the benefits? And if it's impacting the public, how can this be allowed?
The who is a great question. And when you come upon a topic like this, a lot of people, when they are new to it and they realize what's going on, they want to share it with their friends, their family, their peers. But when they get asked questions, they need to know the answers, or they might look like a conspiracy nut job if they don't have the truth. Because when people come to you with the answers and you don't have them, it's easy to dismiss and go back to sleep, basically. What I like to do in these instances is give people the opportunity to learn for themselves by giving them the resources and showing them the way, right? Guiding them in the right direction and offering them things like my movie and what have you. But the who is doing this, it gets really deep and convoluted, and why they would do it, it's very layered. But it depends on who you're talking to. You have to know your audience and meet them where they're at. Suppose I'm talking to my grandmother about it and she's got questions. I'll keep it really simple and I'll say, Bill Gates is the largest farm owner now in the country. And if he's behind geoengineering, which he is, the media will say that he is the sugar daddy behind geoengineering, not Bill Gates, Melinda Gates Foundation, but private donations from billionaire Bill Gates. And if he's the largest farm owner in the country, then it's an obvious conflict of interest, because if he's pulling the strings on the geoengineering, he can dictate who gets rain, who gets drought, and then gobble up real estate on the cheap. Also, Big Ag, who is all in bed with these different consortium think tanks who seem to me not in the best interest for humanity. You can also trade weather as a commodity on the stock exchange now. That's a thing. So if you can control the weather, you can control finances, gobble up small farms, and Big Ag can take over by controlling the food supply. Why would they do that? To be able to increase food prices, to make more money for themselves. A lot of it's greed. If you take a step back from it, there's a lot of money involved here and a lot of greed. And if you can dictate where there's going to be no rain, you can push people out of certain regions. There's a thing called Agenda 2030, where the powers that be, this can be a trigger word, but it's deep. It's the Club of Rome, the Trilateral Commission, the World Economic Forum, the UN. There's a lot of big players in this, but they want to push people out of rural communities and into 15-minute cities, they claim. And then what that means is when you live in this small region, anything you do, they want to take 15 minutes so that you're not driving around too much, and then you're in your city and controlled. And if they can control the movement of people and control who lives where, and then tell people they can't live in rural communities anymore because of fires and what have you, the fires are pushing people out of certain regions. The goal seems to be to create these mega cities and to push people out of livable land. Another, for instance, is in California. The lawmakers said that by 2030, they're banning all gas and diesel powered generators. Now, so many people in California live off grid. They rely on this kind of thing. But the global warming monster, which is all fabricated, we don't have these problems. When they can create heat waves and create drought with geoengineering and then point the finger at us, it's perfect for their scenario. So what happens is we are subject to these things, and then the rural communities have to take the hit, and they're pulling all the stops. In the community that I live in, they're meeting and having a ban on gas-powered small devices at first, like lawnmowers and whatnot. But eventually they'll come for the cars, and then they'll make people have electric cars only, and then they can dictate who goes where and how, and even shut your car off if you drive too far and whatnot. They want to control the movement of humanity. I believe that there is a spiritual aspect to this, and that we're evolving, and that they're really terrified of us. So they want to push us into cities, control us with frequency, 5G, and even the shots and what have you, and to be able to not have anybody slip by, and controlling their own future.
So, and you mentioned the global warming hoax. So why are you saying that? Because we all look upon it, we see how the ice is melting, and we see all these things. And so why are you calling it a hoax? What is the reality? What is really taking place if it is a hoax, and how do we know?
So one way to see it firsthand is when your region has heat waves, and if you keep a look at the sky and you witness that these heat waves are being engineered and manipulated. You'll have a clear blue sky, and the next day it will say that there's a heat wave coming, but the planes will show up and they'll start gridding the sky, and what they'll do is leave a haze that's lower in the sky. So if you have high level clouds, it does cool, but low level clouds will trap heat. So heat is trapped, heat waves are created, and then the headlines point the finger at global warming, whereas they created the heat wave to have that headline. Same with fires. You'll have the spraying, which has been narrowed down to aluminum oxide, barium salts, and a couple other constituents, but aluminum oxide and barium salts are patented fire accelerants. So fire accelerants are sprayed on the forests, and then the aluminum oxide disrupts the tree's ability to uptake water, makes them look drought-stricken, but really they just can't uptake the water. The immune systems are breaking down. They're becoming susceptible to beetles and what have you, and then they're fire-prone. And so you have these harsh fires that are almost likely caused by either arsons on the ground or precipitated lightning through the geoengineering patents that they have. And then when these fires go wild, they have the technology, they've had it for some time, but they don't say on the media, we can put out fires with rain. They won't alleviate droughts with rain. They know how to seed clouds. It's very much common knowledge to ski resorts and hydroelectric power plants who fill their reservoirs to keep their hydro dams going and their electricity and what have you. And then go back to Vietnam. Obviously, that project flooded the Ho Chi Minh Trail and is admitted. But now when the fires come, instead of engineering rain, there's engineered high-powered winds over these fires. And the fires are directed in certain situations towards towns and cities. And the tech exists to quell these things, but they don't. So it makes you think, why would they? It's so that they could get these global headlines to push this narrative of global warming, climate change. I've done a lot of research on the ice melt, which it does melt slowly. And even if all of it melted, we'd see sea level rises of about 1 inch, which wouldn't impact anything. The Al Gore scenario that Manhattan's going to be underwater, and the predictions that he made never came to fruition. His film, An Inconvenient Truth, and book, it worked its way into the curriculum of schools. And in Kent, UK, which is in England, school district, parents had to sue the school district to get that removed from the curriculum. And the federal judge over there said, there's no reason why this should be in the curriculum. None of these things have come true. And it's actually just propaganda. So then also you've got Greta, and she's a player as well, convincing the world that we've got these huge problems and something needs to be done. But at the end, you can extrapolate and realize that it's a play to take away our freedoms, to push technocracy, to potentially even create like a social credit system on a carbon-based financial system even. And it's all pretty predatory to take away all the things that we've worked for to get to where we're at with freedoms and being able to, like, even just being able to take my car and put some gasoline in it and drive across the country. With an electric car, these things can be shut off remotely. And if they don't have charging stations ready for you in the desert or whatever, your access and your ability to travel and ability to move will be limited. And it seems like just a play to keep humanity down and to get the oligarchs even more powerful in this technocratic takeover that involves smart meters, cameras everywhere, and biometric facial recognition monitoring, and all this nonsense that we never needed in the first place.
Yeah, and in your movie also, you were showing how they were able to control then the jet streams in the ocean, which is huge, how they move. And so what kind of technology were they utilizing for that?
So there's this thing called HARP. It's an acronym, HARP. It stands for the Highly Active Auroral Research Program. This was in Alaska. And this technology has, over the decades, been shrunk down basically and advanced so that we now have these HARP type stations more localized. They're called ionospheric heaters. But what HARP was, an antenna array the size of a football field. There's about 50 antennas, 70 feet tall, and they would pick a focal point in the atmosphere, and using radio waves, they can heat the atmosphere. All right. So just like how you put something in the microwave, if you put something in the microwave and turn it on, there's intersecting radio waves, micro-sized radio waves, microwaves. They're intersecting at the focal point that is the food. And the water in the food is oscillating, and that oscillation causes it to heat. That same technology of intersecting radio waves was utilized in our atmosphere to create heat. So you can create heat bubbles and heat waves using this technology. And in the film, what was created was, what they were calling it in the media was the blob. It was this giant high pressure system over the coast of California that, as the jet stream came over the Pacific west to east, it's supposed to hit the Pacific Northwest from like San Francisco all the way up to Canada and dump this deluge, this seasonal deluge, this 5-month rain pattern. But instead, as the jet stream came and hit this massive wall of high pressure, okay, if you ever watch the Weather Channel, there's H's and L's. High and low pressure. High pressure is heat rising, low pressure is cool air, and these things clash to create hurricanes, tornadoes, thunderstorms, and it dictates how the weather moves around, especially when we watch the Weather Channel growing up and what have you, to see how the weather was doing. So if you can create the H's, the high pressure systems, you can control a large aspect of the weather. And in this instance, drought was created on the West Coast by creating this massive high pressure blob, they called it. And as the jet stream hit it, it had to go up to Canada and around. And for years, California didn't get any rain. And so imagine you're a farmer and you're 4 years into a drought, and then Monsanto comes knocking on your door offering you decent money for your farm. You can't predict the future. You don't control the weather. And so maybe you'll sell because you don't think the rain's going to come back, or you don't know, or you've been destitute because you haven't been able to do your normal farming over the years. And this play is happening, and it's even happening to Iran, where their rain clouds are being drained, where they're slowly targeting Iran as a war thing going on. Like, we're backing Israel, and the long-term plan seems to be to attack Iran, but slowly but surely we're droughting them out with technology that we've supplied Israel, and we're helping them with the UN and what have you. And the president of Iran, Ahmadinejad, he came out publicly and said that their rain clouds are drained at the border, and when they get to Iran, they don't have anything. And so imagine over time, if you can drought-stricken a country and weaken them from within, and then decades later, there will be much less of an adversary.
Yeah, that's amazing. So this way they're able to control food, manufacturing the food, and then also control resources like electrical resources. And so if we don't have gasoline, we, like you said, they can control movement of people. They can also give people, if you don't have a certain credit score, then we don't allow you to move above state lines or whatever. So there's a lot of things, a lot of implications that can be there. And you always wonder, nobody would do that. But it is happening in other countries. And so we need, as individuals, and to be able to stand up and then recognize that our rights in this area are being infringed upon. And that is then impacting our future, but it's also impacting our health, our well-being. So here, sunlight, we know how important sunlight is. We got vitamin D from the sun. And we know sunlight, as it hits the skin surface, it really turns on mitochondria, energy production within all the cells. And if we don't have that, then all of a sudden we're moving towards disease because we're not able to produce the components that we need in order to be able to stay healthy. And then in addition to that, now they're raining heavy metals on us, and heavy metals, cancer causing, heart disease, cardiovascular, neurological, dementia, Alzheimer's, and chronic infections. You're less able to deal with the chronic infections. Yeah, the list goes on as to the impact on us as an individual when this is going on. So it is so important that we, in addition to actively see what we can do on a local level and push for that this is not taking place, but also then realize, what do I need to do personally in order to be able to address the exposure that we're having? Yeah, so tell me a little bit. So you're talking about aluminum, you're talking about barium, you're talking about strontium, and then I also know like silver dioxide is a common one as well. What are some of the impacts from these things? And why should people be concerned that this is coming down on us?
There's, for instance, the farmers and their crops are being impacted. And Monsanto has created aluminum resistant genetics because they see in the pipeline that only their seeds will be able to grow if geoengineering is fully accepted and we're constantly spraying the skies with aluminum and it's raining down. It's important, like you said, to learn about detoxing and chelation. The impacts that these things have, every nanoparticulate metal that's sprayed has a different impact. There's researchers that have shown that manganese is sprayed, and manganese actually agitates people, makes them violent. There's an activist, African-American activist, Dick Gregory, who's passed away, but he was showing that manganese was being sprayed on the ghettos in New York, and then people would just erupt into violence. I firmly believe, based on my research, that manganese is sprayed on cows and livestock as well, and that's what mad cow disease is. There's also mercury being sprayed, lead being sprayed, and obviously this impacts our bodies. There's lithium being sprayed on the population to pacify them or to impact the people in certain ways. The aluminum, it can bog down your system, especially neurologically, but altogether, with the combination of EMF and fluoride in our diet and what have you, it's this toxic combo that wreaks havoc on our immune systems and then can lead to Alzheimer's and dementia. I was just in the UK where I learned that the #1 cause of death over there now is Alzheimer's and dementia, which has been linked to aluminum toxicity in the brain. So learning about what's being sprayed and then mineralizing and not being subjected to it as much because we're up to speed on our minerals and taking good care of our bodies. And then also learning about how to detox from these things is very important. But firstly, we must understand and realize that it's actually happening.
Yeah, and this is the reason why I felt this was so important, because here we're talking about health and we're doing all these great things to try to stay healthy. And now, and we recognize EMF, we recognize cell phones, we recognize the GMO food. So all these layers of stressors that we're cleaning out. We're cleaning out toxins from our home, cleaning up what kind of beauty products and hygiene products that we're using. And then all of a sudden, we have this additional factor that we have to address that is impacting our body. So the awareness is the key. And you're talking about manganese. Yeah, it's fascinating when I do like hair mineral analysis on an individual and I see manganese very elevated. And it is directly correlated with things like schizophrenia, like manic depressive, all these kind of psychotic type of disorders. So you can, if you then are spraying this on a population in the guise of controlling the weather, in the guise of saying that we are protecting us from global warming. Now we are, as an individual, all of a sudden we start to exhibit things that we shouldn't, even though we're taking care of our health so much. Yeah, this is a big deal.
It definitely is. And also worth mentioning is the impact it has on the food supply. Not only is the food being rained down with toxic elements, but when you come out in the spring and you decrease the sunlight and you decrease the lumens and mess with the frequency of the sun, a lot of plants, and I've spoken to farmers across the world, a lot of plants react. They think that it's winter, because when you mess with the sun to that degree, their only reference point is in the winter, it's low light and it's a more of a white light and it must be winter. So I'm going to go to seed. So these plants go to seed out of schedule, and then the farmers lose their crops, or they mess with the temperatures so much that the blossoms on the fruit trees, you'll end up with stone fruits and they won't ripen properly. And it seems to be this play on the food supply where they're sharpening their tools so that when they get it proper, we'll have extreme food shortages because of the implications of what they're doing. There's Maui farmers that had been waking up to this a decade ago, and all of their thin-skinned papayas and cilantro and susceptible fruits and vegetables were dying. And they related it to the chemtrails, and they built these rudimentary like hoop house like covers, like not even greenhouses, but they figured out the fallout was coming right down on these thin-skinned fruits, and they saved their plants and vegetables by acknowledging that this was ongoing, because the powers that be were manipulating the trade winds over Maui, and a lot of this fallout was coming down. And activists came together and spoke up. And that was one of the big inspirations that I had when I first started doing my investigation, is if these people are rallying together and having protests and all agreeing on this and then protecting their crops from just a little plastic from this fallout, then something must be happening.
Yeah, and it's fascinating talking about the food supply, and obviously we know how desperate an individual gets when they don't get any food. So if somebody else is controlling what is grown and what's not grown, and then maybe artificially is creating then a food shortage using these kind of tools. I remember listening to Peter Diamandis a while back ago, and him talking about 3D printing of food, where you can then essentially use 3D printing to create then the structure of protein of a chicken or something like that in the heart of LA. And you can do this. So if you have then the shortage of real food, it can then push people into this artificial food that, yes, it has the protein structure, yes, it has the chemicals, but it doesn't have that life force that our body really require and need. The vibrational content when you eat a fresh carrot, a real carrot, versus something that maybe has been 3D printed and may have the chemical structure the same, but it doesn't have that life force of it. So we're moving, it seems like we're moving away from the life-giving food. And now we're by creating then the Frankenskies, and then we're creating Frankenfood, and soon we don't have food at all. So now we need to then move into alternate ways to so-called save the planet from a food shortage that you created yourself.
Yes, our natural way of living and our sustainability and sovereignty is essentially under attack. And the 3D printing is already happening, especially in Europe and the UK, where like KFC, which isn't even chicken anymore, they're not allowed to call themselves Kentucky Fried Chicken. They just had to change their name to KFC because they're no longer selling actual chicken, which is horrible. Our bodies aren't built to digest technological abomination Frankenfoods.
Yeah, Matt, thank you so much for everything you're doing. This is incredible, and that's why I felt it was so important in this podcast to really share this information, because here we're doing so much to stay healthy. And we need to recognize the forces that be and what they do to prevent our pursuit of staying healthy. To me, I feel when we have a basic human right to be able to live life freely. And then when you have people that are doing things that are interfering with that, interfering with our health, because I see chronic diseases are just skyrocketing, and we didn't deal with these kind of issues 50 years ago. That's why this information was so important. So thank you, Matt, for sharing this. And again, people out there, Frankenskies is an amazing movie. We had a showing of it last night here at the Karlfeldt Center, filled the house, and the Q&A after was really powerful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. And if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to address them at frankenskies@gmail.com.